Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to take you into one of the most misunderstood emotional battles in modern relationships. It's quiet, it's hidden, it's invisible to the outside world, yet it shapes the destiny of countless connections, breakups, reconciliations, and heartbreaks. An avoidant doesn't let go because they never process their emotions when you were close. And this simple truth explains a lifetime of confusing behavior, mixed signals, and emotional silence that leaves you questioning your worth. When you were present, consistently showing up, offering love, softness, patience, and a safe emotional space, the avoidant wasn't processing any of it, not because they didn't care, but because their nervous system wouldn't allow them to feel deeply while being emotionally close to someone. Closeness to an avoidant creates internal pressure. It activates their old wiring, their survival instincts, their fear of depending on someone. When you were near them, they weren't experiencing the full depth of your value. They were busy defending themselves from the fear that intimacy would expose them, overwhelm them, or leave them vulnerable to disappointment or rejection. They were in self-protection mode, not connection mode, and that protective mode shuts down emotional awareness. This is why avoidants often seem numb, indifferent, or cold during the relationship, not because love wasn't there, but because survival instincts overpowered emotional recognition. But when you leave, when you go quiet, when you're no longer accessible, something dramatic changes inside them. The fear of intimacy no longer has a target, so it calms down. And when that fear calms down, the emotions they couldn't feel before begin rising to the surface slowly, quietly, and often painfully. This is the moment they begin to process what the relationship meant to them. This is the moment they start recognizing the ways you showed up, the way you loved, the comfort you brought, the safety they felt around you but never admitted. All of that emotional material, suppressed for months or even years, begins to come up only after you're gone. It's not that your absence creates new emotions, it simply reveals the ones that were already there but locked behind their internal defenses. This is also why avoidants don't let go easily. When the relationship was active, their emotional bandwidth was restricted by fear. But after you're gone, their emotional bandwidth expands, and they begin to feel what they couldn't allow themselves to feel before. They start missing you not in the moment you walked away, but in the days, weeks, or months after, when the emotional weight finally catches up with them. They remember your consistency. They remember the safety of your presence. They remember the emotional depth that their nervous system wasn't ready to receive. And the more they remember, the harder it becomes for them to truly let go. Avoidants replay moments you've forgotten. They revisit conversations in silence. They think about the way you cared for them in a way they never articulated. They feel the loss not in an explosive, outwardly emotional way, but in a hidden, internal way that lingers. Their regret doesn't show through tears or communication, it shows through avoidance of moving on, through comparisons with new people, through unexpectedly missing your emotional energy at random moments. They detach externally, but hold on internally, because processing emotional reality late is part of their psychological pattern. This is why you may see them move on quickly on the surface, getting into rebound relationships, acting unbothered, posting confidently, appearing unaffected, but underneath that facade, their emotional truth is delayed. They don't feel heartbreak in real time. They feel heartbreak in the aftermath. They don't feel connection during the relationship. They feel connection in the silence after it ends. And they don't understand their own reactions, which is why they often come back months later when you've healed or detached. For the avoidant who cannot let go, you become an emotional imprint, a memory that returns in moments of quiet, during vulnerable nights, or when they encounter someone who lacks your depth, your empathy, or your emotional intelligence. They struggled to let go because you represented the closest thing to emotional safety they have ever experienced, even if they were too overwhelmed to appreciate it at the time. Your presence was soothing, even if it triggered their fears. Your absence becomes haunting, because it awakens the emotional recognition they suppressed. This is the painful truth. Avoidants don't let go because they never fully held on when they had the chance. They don't lose you when you leave. They lose you when they finally realize what they had, and by then, it's too late to reach for it. Avoidants live in two emotional worlds, and this is the core of their inner conflict. They experience life through the constant tension between two powerful fears: the fear of intimacy when you are close, and the fear of abandonment when you are gone. This emotional contradiction is not logical, not intentional, and not something they consciously choose. It's something wired into them from childhood experiences, where closeness felt unsafe and distance felt safer, but loneliness felt unbearable. So they grow up believing that they must protect themselves from both connection and loss at the same time. This creates a psychological trap where they push away the very love they crave and then panic when it's no longer available. When you are close to them, physically, emotionally, or relationally, their fear of intimacy becomes activated. It's not your love that scares them. It's the vulnerability required to receive it. Vulnerability is the language of trusting someone, but trust is a foreign concept to an avoidant. They learned early on that emotional openness leads to disappointment, criticism, abandonment, or emotional suffocation. So when you get close, even with the purest intentions, their nervous system sounds an internal alarm. They start pulling back, withdrawing, detaching, becoming colder, and creating space because closeness feels like a threat. Not because you did something wrong, but because their past taught them that needing someone is dangerous. But when you walk away, when you go silent, when you stop reaching out, when you become unavailable, their other fear begins to rise, the fear of abandonment. This fear isn't loud in the beginning. It whispers first. It starts with mild curiosity about what you're doing. Then it becomes concern, then anxiety. Then over time, an emotional ache that they don't know how to express. Avoidants are terrified of depending on someone, but they're equally terrified of losing the rare person they allowed even a small part of their heart to open for. This creates a painful emotional limbo. When you're close, they fear being swallowed. When you're gone, they fear being forgotten. This is the internal tug-of-war that keeps them stuck between wanting you and avoiding you. They desperately want connection, but they don't trust their ability to handle it. They dream of being understood and accepted, but they fear the responsibility of letting someone in. And because they don't know how to express this conflict, they seem unpredictable, confusing, or emotionally unavailable. This dual fear explains why avoidants often behave in ways that contradict their true feelings. They can push you away while longing for you. They can act indifferent while thinking about you constantly. They can pretend you mean nothing while privately replaying memories. They can shut you out yet silently hope you don't give up on them. To them, these contradictions aren't hypocrisy, they are survival. This is how they keep their emotional world safe, even if it costs them love, closeness, and connection. Their mind tells them, if they get too close, you'll get hurt. Their heart whispers, if they leave, you'll be alone again. And so they try to live in the small space between these two fears. This emotional paralysis prevents them from committing fully, but it also prevents them from moving on fully. They don't let you in, but they don't let you go. They avoid emotional closeness, but they avoid emotional finality too. That's why they keep checking your social media, keep your photos, remember your words, or appear in your life again just when you start healing. They can't handle the intensity of intimacy, but they can't handle the emptiness of losing it either. The emotional contradiction of the avoidant is that they don't feel safe with closeness or distance. They feel safest in the middle. But relationships cannot survive in the middle. Love cannot grow in emotional limbo. Connection cannot thrive where fear dominates. And so they stay stuck, repeating the same internal conflict over and over with different people, hoping someone will love them enough to understand their silence and strong enough not to be destroyed by it. This is the hidden world of an avoidant. They are not cold, they are conflicted. They are not emotionless, they are emotionally overwhelmed. They are not heartless, they are heart protected. And their struggle is not with you, it's with their own contradictory instincts that they never learned how to manage. They fear closeness because they've been hurt. They fear distance because they've been abandoned. And the tragedy of their journey is that they live in a world where love feels dangerous, but loneliness feels unbearable. An avoidant who can't let go lives in a constant emotional contradiction. They don't reach out, they don't chase, they don't confess, yet they also cannot move forward, cannot detach, and cannot erase the emotional imprint you left on them. They appear still, calm, composed, and indifferent on the outside, but inside, they are stuck in a quiet emotional struggle that they never learned how to express. Their heart wants closeness, but their wounds push them toward distance. And this is not a temporary phase. It is the emotional reality of someone who has spent their entire life learning how to survive without depending on anyone, yet longing deeply for a connection they don't know how to hold. Avoidants don't know how to reach out because reaching out requires vulnerability. It requires them to confront their fear of rejection, their fear of being seen, their fear of needing someone. To them, Reaching out is not just a text message, it is an emotional risk. It feels like exposing a wound they've spent years covering. So even if they miss you deeply, even if they think about you constantly, even if their heart aches for the connection you once had, they hesitate. Their mind convinces them it's safer to stay silent than to reveal feelings they can't control. Their past experiences whisper, needing someone is dangerous, don't do it. So they stay quiet, even when that silence hurts them. But their inability to reach out does not mean they can move on. They struggle to detach because you represented something rare, a sense of emotional safety, understanding, or comfort they don't experience with others. Avoidants do not bond easily. Most people never get past their walls. Most connections stay surface level, but you were different. You made them feel something unfamiliar and unsettling, seen, valued, and emotionally safe. Losing that is not easy for them. Even if they don't show it, they feel the absence intensely. They replay moments in their mind. They compare others to you. They experience sudden waves of longing they cannot explain. But because they suppress these emotions, the longing becomes trapped instead of expressed. They do not cry. They do not talk. They do not open up. They simply carry the emotions internally and pretend they don't exist. That's why they seem detached, not because they don't care, but because caring feels overwhelming. They don't have the emotional vocabulary to express loss. They don't have the tools to handle heartbreak. So instead of dealing with it, they freeze, they shut down, they avoid. And from the outside, it looks like they've moved on. But the truth is far more complicated. Their inability to move forward creates internal conflict. They try dating other people, but the emotional connection doesn't match the one they had with you. They try distracting themselves with work or routines, but certain memories still trigger unexpected feelings. They try pretending you didn't matter, but something reminds them of you, a song, a scent, a phrase, and suddenly they're transported back to a moment they thought they had forgotten. Avoidants don't forget, they suppress. And what is suppressed always resurfaces. This is why avoidants often come back long after you've healed, not because they suddenly changed, but because the emotional processing they avoided finally caught up with them. When they feel the fear of losing you more intensely than the fear of being close, they start realizing what you meant to them. They feel the weight of the connection they had. They recognize the comfort you brought. And the emotional paralysis they lived in for so long shifts, but often too late. Avoidants live in a world where their heart and their defense mechanisms fight for control. Their heart wants connection. Their wounds want protection. Their heart wants you. Their patterns push you away. And so they remain stuck in a painful middle ground where they cannot fully come closer and cannot fully let go. They linger in your memory, and you linger in theirs. They hold on to you quietly, silently, secretly, not because they want to play games, but because their internal world is a maze of fear, longing, and emotional confusion. The tragedy is that avoidants rarely show this battle on the surface. They appear unaffected, but inside, they are carrying a connection they cannot release. They appear calm, but they are emotionally conflicted. They appear distant, but they feel deeply in places they don't know how to express. And because they don't understand their own emotions in real time, they hold on to you in the only way they know how. Quietly, from a distance, without reaching out, but without ever truly letting go. Avoidants miss you in silence, and that silence is not emptiness, it is the place where all the emotions they never expressed begin to surface. They replay memories alone, not because they intend to dwell on the past, but because their heart processes emotional truth slowly, privately, and only when they feel safe enough to face it. During the relationship, they were overwhelmed by closeness. They shut down because vulnerability frightened them. They pulled back because intimacy felt threatening. But now, with distance and separation, the very thing they once feared, emotional closeness, turns into the thing they quietly long for. And since expressing need feels unsafe for them, they hide their longing behind a calm, controlled exterior that fools everyone except themselves. This private replaying of the relationship is something they will never confess, even if it consumes them. Avoidants don't reflect out loud, they reflect internally. They replay the conversations where you were patient when they weren't communicating well. They remember the moments when you tried to get closer, and instead of appreciating your effort, they felt invaded. They think about how you cared for them in ways they couldn't fully receive. They remember how your energy felt safe, consistent, grounding. These memories show up at the most unexpected times, Lying in bed at night, standing in the shower, driving in silence, or seeing someone who resembles you. Their emotional processing is delayed, but once it begins, it is powerful and persistent. They may suppress their feelings outwardly, but internally, they hold on to you because their hearts never learned how to express need. To an avoidant, need equals danger. They were conditioned early on to believe that relying on someone leads to disappointment, judgment, abandonment, or rejection. So even when they miss you, that longing feels like a threat to their emotional survival. They cannot let themselves fully feel it without triggering their defenses. This is why they don't reach out. This is why they stay silent. Not because they don't care, but because caring openly overwhelms them. Their longing hides behind routine. It hides behind their calm face, their controlled demeanor, their detached posture. But on the inside, they feel the emotional absence intensely. They scroll through your old messages, not to respond, but to revisit a familiar warmth. They check your social media not to reconnect, but to see if the door to you is still open. They think about texting you, then panic about what vulnerability implies. They stumble across something that reminds them of you and find themselves in an emotional spiral they won't share with anyone. Avoidants feel deeply, they just don't show deeply. Their emotional world is internal, not external. It is introspective, not expressive. They don't talk about missing you, but they think about you often. They don't show pain, but they feel it privately. They don't admit regret, but they carry it quietly, like a weight they can't put down. Their longing is not loud. It is subtle, persistent, emotional, hidden. And the reason they won't express it is rooted in something deeper. Vulnerability threatens their sense of control. They have spent their whole lives building walls to protect themselves from emotional disappointment. They learned early on that showing need leads to pain. So now, even when they crave emotional connection, their mind tells them to withdraw. Even when they want to care, their body tells them to shut down. Even when their heart aches for you, their survival instinct tells them to stay silent. So they live in this paradox, longing for the one person who made them feel safe, yet unable to approach that safety because their emotional wiring is built to avoid vulnerability. They care, but they hide it. They feel, but they suppress it. They remember, but they pretend they don't. And this internal contradiction becomes their hidden struggle. Avoidants don't forget you simply because you're not around. They remember you because the emotional imprint you left bypassed their defenses. They don't reach out because reaching out requires a level of emotional exposure they've never mastered. But they can't let go because part of them knows they lost someone who made them feel something they didn't know how to keep. Their silence is not lack of emotion, it is proof that they feel more than they can handle. And the memories they replay alone are reminders of the connection their wounds wouldn't allow them to claim. Avoidants can't let go because you represented something they never received growing up: emotional safety, understanding, patience, and unconditional presence. And this truth explains why your absence lingers inside them long after the relationship ends. For most avoidants, childhood was a place where emotions weren't met with comfort. Their sadness was ignored, their needs were minimized, their feelings were dismissed, or they were forced to become independent far too early. They learned to survive without leaning on anyone, and that survival mode became their identity. So when they meet someone who offers emotional warmth, consistency, and genuine care, it feels foreign, unfamiliar, and uncomfortable. But deep down, it also feels healing. You became the emotional experience they never had but secretly longed for. When someone provides emotional safety to an avoidant, the avoidant doesn't immediately recognize its value. At first, it overwhelms them. Safety feels like pressure. Closeness feels like suffocation. Vulnerability feels like danger. So instead of drawing closer, they withdraw. Instead of opening up, they shut down. Instead of appreciating the emotional depth you offered, they resist it. They don't do this out of cruelty, they do it because their nervous system is wired to fear the very thing they need. But over time, even while pushing you away, their heart still registers the difference. They begin to feel something they don't have the capacity to articulate. You treat me in a way no one ever has. You understand me in a way I didn't think was possible. You see me even when I hide. You stay even when I pull away. This creates an emotional imprint they can't shake. You didn't just love them, you provided them with an emotional foundation they never had. And because they didn't grow up with that foundation, they don't know how to recreate it or find it easily again. That's why when you leave, your absence hits them harder than they show. They lose not just a partner, but the rare feeling of being emotionally understood. And that kind of loss doesn't fade quickly. Avoidants carry their sense of unworthiness quietly. They don't believe they deserve the love of someone patient, loyal, and emotionally intelligent. So when they lose someone like you, they don't just lose a relationship, they lose the one person who made them feel safe enough to be imperfect. They lose the one person who didn't punish them for their walls. They lose the one person who made room for their fears instead of judging them. That level of emotional acceptance is rare, and avoidants know it, even if they never say it out loud. This is why they can't let go. You weren't just another attachment. You were the contradiction to everything they believed about relationships. You showed them that closeness doesn't have to lead to pain, that vulnerability doesn't equal rejection, and that emotional intimacy can feel grounding instead of threatening. You showed them a different emotional reality, one their wounds wouldn't let them fully accept, but one their heart couldn't forget. The reason they struggle to detach is because no one else replicates what you offered. The moment they try connecting with someone new, they feel the difference. Other people may be attractive, interesting, or fun, but they don't offer the same emotional resonance. They don't create the same sense of safety. They don't make the avoidant feel seen in the same way. And because avoidants depend heavily on emotional familiarity, your absence becomes a painful contrast. They may try to move on with someone more emotionally distant, someone who doesn't make them uncomfortable with closeness, but that new dynamic doesn't fulfill them, it only feels easier. And easy is not the same as meaningful. When avoidants lose someone who provided emotional safety, they feel an internal emptiness they don't know how to explain. They feel disconnected, restless, irritable, nostalgic, or numb. They may throw themselves into work or distractions, but the longing remains. And because expressing need is terrifying to them, they try to cope alone, reinforcing the cycle that made them avoidant in the first place. You become the emotional blueprint they measure others against even when they don't want to. You become the internal standard they can't replace even when they try to. Avoidants don't let go because losing someone who loved them the right way feels like losing a piece of themselves they never knew existed. You awaken something real in them, something they weren't ready for but deeply needed. And long after the relationship ends, that part of them still remembers you not because they choose to hold on, but because emotional safety leaves a permanent mark on a heart that never grew up with it. The hidden struggle of an avoidant is not losing you. It is living with the regret of knowing love was offered to them, and their wounds kept them from receiving it. This kind of regret does not appear the way you expect. They don't break down publicly, they don't confess their feelings, and they don't reveal their sorrow in ways you can see. Instead, it becomes a quiet ache that sits underneath their everyday life, surfacing in moments they never prepared for. Avoidants do not forget the person who loved them genuinely. They suppress the emotions during the relationship, but the realization of what they lost comes slowly and heavily once the emotional threat is gone. By the time they understand the value of what they had, it's usually too late. You've detached, healed, or moved forward. And that gap between what they needed and what they were ready for becomes the root of their lifelong regret. Their regret is not the dramatic kind that movies portray. It's subtle, internal, and haunting. It shows up in the form of sudden memories that hit them at night, moments of comparison with new people, or a feeling of emptiness when they realize no one else makes them feel the way you did. They remember your consistency, your emotional stability, your patience, your softness, qualities they didn't have the capacity to appreciate fully when they were with you. This regret grows not because you left, but because in hindsight, they see how they pushed away someone who brought emotional peace into their life. They recognize that you didn't abandon them, you simply stopped accepting the role of being their emotional caretaker. And the avoidant realizes that they lost someone who was not trying to control them, but trying to love them. The hardest part of their regret is that they know, deep down, that they contributed to the loss. Avoidants often struggle with accountability in the moment because acknowledging emotional responsibility feels overwhelming. But in the silence that follows a breakup, they begin to see their patterns clearly. They replay moments when you reached out and they shut down, when you asked for connection and they withdrew, when you offered stability and they responded with distance. And instead of feeling justified, they begin to feel the weight of what their defensive behaviors cost them. This is a type of regret that doesn't fade. It stays because it comes from a deeper emotional truth. They lost someone who understood them better than they understood themselves. Avoidants carry this regret for years because they know emotionally safe partners are extremely rare. They may date others, but they feel the emotional difference immediately. They may try casual connections, but those connections feel empty. They may distract themselves, but the underlying sense of loss remains. The regret they feel isn't just about losing you, it's about losing the version of themselves that existed when they were with you. You brought out feelings in them they don't know how to recreate on their own. You softened them, you grounded them, you made them feel seen in a way they secretly crave but rarely receive. So when you leave, they don't just lose the relationship, they lose the emotional part of themselves you awaken. This regret also becomes a silent burden, because avoidants don't have the tools to express it, repair it, or seek closure. They want to reach out but panic at the vulnerability it requires. They want to apologize but fear being rejected. They want to reconnect but believe they no longer deserve you, so they remain silent, carrying their regret privately, replaying moments without acting on them. This internal conflict becomes one of the most painful experiences of their emotional life, wanting love but fearing the path that leads back to it. Their regret becomes a lesson they learned too late. They finally understand that distance doesn't protect them, it isolates them. They realize that shutting down doesn't keep them safe. It pushes away the very people capable of loving them. They understand that avoiding emotional discomfort only creates deeper emotional pain later. And as this awareness grows, so does the regret of knowing they had someone who loved them deeply and they couldn't receive it because their wounds were louder than their heart. In time, this regret shapes how they view relationships. It softens their inner world. It forces them to confront the truth that love was never the enemy their unhealed fears were. And even if they never reach out, even if they never say a word, even if they appear fine, they carry a quiet, lifelong knowing. You were the moment they had real love, and they let it slip through their fingers.